Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world and your life is about to change. We're going to learn sector graphs and divided bar graphs. Now I like these because the mathematics involved is a little more rigorous, so I'm sure you're going to love them too. Before we actually go through what they are, we need to figure out why we would ever actually use them. So let's look at some familiar types of statistical displays. So on your screen, I've just put a stem and leaf plot. So you can see that it lists all the different data points, and it's pretty easy to see how many times a data point occurs. And that's also the same for a dot plot, which I'll put up here. You can see how many times a score occurs. Now let's look at another one that you've already seen. So you've also already seen a column graph. Now, hopefully nothing I've told you so far is new. So all of these displays are good at telling you how many times a data point occurs. They're ways of displaying the actual data, actually what you've found out. So in the case of the column graph, it's good at showing you people's hair colour. But sector graphs and divided bar graphs are used for a different purpose. They're actually used to show you not how many people were in some particular category, but rather the proportion of people that were in that category. And that's something that you can't get from the dot plot, column graph, or stem and leaf plot directly. So I'm just going to show you what a sector graph looks like. So on your screen now, you can see a sector graph. Now, you might have heard it called a pie chart. I don't really care what you call it. So we see that it says information about Australia's states by land area, but it doesn't actually tell you what the land area of any of those states actually is. You can see it just shows you the percentage. So the words proportion, percentage, and fraction can be used here interchangeably. We're looking at what the percentage of land area taken up by each state is, or the fraction of each state's land area. Either of those, they're exactly the same concept. So that's why we use sector graphs. Now I'm going to show you a divided bar graph. So now on your screen, I've shown you a divided bar graph. And as it says there, it's used for organising or displaying information. Yes, that's why we're showing you all of these displays. Dot plots, column graphs, they all display statistical information. But, like a sector graph, a divided bar graph shows you the proportion, or if you like, the percentage or the fraction that each category represents. So, on the divided bar graph that we have over here, we can see that we can display information about the percentage of fruit. So this was actually a survey of what people's favourite fruit was, and you can see 30%, for example, said bananas. Now, we don't know how many people said bananas. It could have been 3, it could have been 300 for all we know. But we're not interested in that. We're just interested in showing the proportion. Now, what you can see is that even if I took away those numbers about the plums, bananas and that, you can see that bananas were the most popular. They had the greatest proportion. You can probably see, it's around about a quarter. Whereas you can see plums, for example, was the least popular, and it represents only a small fraction or a small proportion of the total votes in this case. All right, so let's go through actually constructing one. Okay, so let's say I surveyed, say, 80 people about their favourite NRL team, and I got the following results. So let's say, of course, Broncos, because they're the best team, they're going to win the premiership this year, 2015. So let's say 40 people said the Broncos. Then, I'd have about 16 for the Cowboys. Raiders, they're not a terrible team either. So let's say 12 people for those, and then I'll just add in a couple more. Okay, so as I said, I surveyed 80 people, okay? Now I want to convert this into a sector graph. So the thing that I have to figure out before I can make the sector graph is how big the area of each sector, or if you like, each slice of pie is going to be. How big is going to be the Broncos slice? How big is going to be the Cowboys slice? And so on. And we figure that out by finding out their proportion. So, as I said, let's say 80 people were surveyed, and these are the numbers that chose each club. So first thing we need to do is we need to figure out, I'm just going to write for proportion. We need to find the proportion or fraction of people that chose each of these teams. So for the Broncos, 40 chose it out of 80. Now obviously I can simplify that fraction to a half, but I'm not so concerned about you simplifying fractions here. You can get your calculator to do it, but we're just going to use that number for something else. So then Cowboys would be 16 over 80 or 1/5. The Raiders would be 12 over 80, which turns out to be 3 over 20. And we can do the same for Warriors and Eels, okay? So I'm just making it into a fraction. I've just taken the number here and I've divided it by the total, 80. So 4 out of 80 people, if you like, chose the Eels, okay? Now what am I going to do with that? Well, we're going to use that to figure out the area of the sector devoted to each of these teams. Now hopefully you all know this, but there's 360 degrees in a circle. So what we want to do is we want to find the fraction devoted to each team and times that by 360. So let's just do a sample calculation. So for the Broncos, their proportion of people that chose that team was 40 over 80 or a half. So in the sector graph, I want to devote half of the circle to them. And because there's 360 degrees in a circle, I'm going to times that 40 over 80 by 360 degrees. Now, of course, that equals a half of 360, of means times. 40 over 80 times 360 is 180 degrees. What that means is the sector devoted to the Broncos should be 180 degrees. So you might need your protractors for these. So I can draw this here is a 180 degree sector. So half of this sector is devoted to the Broncos. Now I do the same for the Cowboys. So their proportion was 16 over 80, which is a fifth. So I want to devote 1/5 of the circle, the pie chart, the sector graph, to the Cowboys. So I do a similar calculation. I do 16 over 80 times 360 degrees, because there are 360 degrees in a circle. And you can let your calculator do the work. That comes out as 72 degrees. So what that means is that I want to devote 72 degrees of this sector graph to the Cowboys. Now, that's a hard one to know off the top of your head, so all I do is I get the protractor and I measure an angle that is about 72 degrees. So in that case, this is actually going to be about this sector here, okay? Of course, when you don't do it on an iPad, you do it in your book, yours will look a lot better. I'm just showing you that that's how we figure out the area of each sector. Now, it doesn't matter if you're not 100% correct. I'm not going to get my protractor out and take marks off if your angle's 72.5 instead of 72. Close enough's good enough, but just make it look right. Okay, so we do the same for all the others. If I wanted to say figure out the Eels, I want to figure out the area of that sector, I'd just go 4 over 80 times 360 degrees, and what I actually get is 18 degrees, okay? Now, because 72 plus 18 equals 90, they would get this little area in here, okay? So I just keep going on like that, finding the area of each sector, finding the angle that that sector makes, and then colouring it in, and that's the sector devoted to that particular team. So this is what the sector graph would look like when it's finished. So it doesn't matter which way up you do it. But here we have half of the sector graph devoted to the Broncos, because half the people said they like the Broncos. We have 1/5 or 16 over 80 devoted to the Raiders, and so on for the other groups. So that's what sector graphs look like. That's how you calculate them. Now, divided bar graphs are very much the same. All you do is figure out the proportion devoted to each of the categories, and then you find that as a percentage of the whole. So I think it's probably easiest for you if you create bar graphs that are 10 centimeters long. So we're going to create a divided bar graph that's 10 centimeters long. However, please note that if you're watching this on a different screen, it might not look 10 centimeters depending on the size of your screen. Okay, so we're going to draw up a bar graph. So they all look the same. It doesn't matter how wide you make it. So I'll just put one up now. Okay, so we draw up a bar like this, doesn't matter how wide it is. I just said, 10 centimeters would make things nice and easy. Okay, so we're going to use our data from before, but we're doing the same thing. We're finding the proportion of the bar devoted to each category. So again, if the bar's 10 centimeters long, remember that Broncos were 40 out of 80 people, or a half, so they were 40 over 80. But instead of timing by 360 degrees here, because I'm not using a circle, I can just times by 10 centimetres. So half of 10 centimetres, or 40 over 80 times 10 centimetres, is just, you guessed it, 5 centimetres. So what that means is that I'm going to dedicate about 5 centimetres of this bar to the Broncos. So at 5 centimetres, rule up my line, and then this area here is going to be devoted to the Broncos. Next for the Raiders, so they were 16 over 80. And again, I'm just going to times that not by 360 degrees, but by 10 centimetres, because that's the length of the bar. I'm finding 16/80ths of 10 centimetres. Okay, and that just turns out to be 2 centimetres. So that's the area that I'm going to devote to the Raiders. And I keep going. So for the Cowboys, that was 12 over 80, and I times that by 10 centimetres, and I get 1.5 centimetres. For the Warriors, they were 8 over 80, so that is 1/10, or 8 over 80 times 10 centimetres. I get 1 centimetre for that, and 0.5 centimetres for the Eels. So I just go through and finish this off. Okay, and there we have the bar graph. So the Broncos, half of it, so they got 5 centimetres. The Raiders were 1/5, or 16 over 80, so they got 2 centimetres. The Cowboys, 1.5 centimetres. Warriors, 1 centimetre. And Eels, 0.5 centimetres. Okay, so we just have to make sure that that adds up to what we want it to. So 5 plus 2 is 7. Plus 1.5, 8.5, 9.5, 10. So it adds up to 10 centimetres, so we know we've done something right. So again, whole point, sector graphs and divided bar graphs. Find the proportion that are in each category, times that number by 360 to find the area of each sector devoted to the category, or when you're doing a divided bar graph, times it by 10 centimetres to find out how long the bar should be devoted to that category. I know that this was a bit complicated. Sorry it was a bit of a long video. This has been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.